Привет, moi druzy. Welcome, my friends. My name is Gerdes, and I try to provide some insights about what's going on in Ukraine and why people are doing what they're doing, particularly the big players like Putin and Zelensky and other key figures. So for some time, people have been asking the question of why Putin thought that Ukraine was a threat. Certainly, there are no neo-Nazis running the government. I mean, we would have found them by now. It's been a year, and that's not the issue. It isn't that they're going to join NATO. They can't actually join NATO as long as there's a civil war within its borders. Like they can't. Like Putin knew that joining NATO was not actually a possibility, and that's part of the pretext, though. But Ukraine is a threat, and Ukraine's a threat to Russia in a very different way, and I'm going to try to lay that out. So here's what I mean. Just by its very existence as a democracy that's westernizing and beginning to like get its legs as a Western government, it is becoming a threat. And if, by the way, in Belarus, if Lukashenko had done this, instead of supporting Lukashenko for, when a few years back when Putin came in to kind of secure Lukashenko, we'd be talking about the fight in Belarus instead of in Ukraine. I believe that firmly here because Putin is not going to be able to tolerate a former Soviet system right on its border like Belarus or like Ukraine that is westernizing, modernizing, becoming part of the other system. Like the idea that Russia is this and the West is that is so powerful. Now, authoritarian regimes just simply cannot abide this. And there's a marked distinction between authoritarian regimes and democracies. So just just as I was thinking through this process, I thought, okay, I'm going to use, and I went and I used some AI to go identify academic studies and research about what authoritarian regimes, the difference between authoritarian regimes and democracies comparatively, and how different they are. So here are 10 major differences, particularly about decision making between authoritarian regimes and democracies. Now, see if this rings true to you. So there was a 2011 study that said that 82% of decisions made by authoritarian leaders are unilateral. Well, yeah, I mean, it wasn't like Putin sitting around with his council. I showed you Putin sitting around with his security council. I called it a cabinet for lack of a better word, but it was not like he was sitting around going, guys, what do you think? Hey, people, let's take a referendum and find out what all of my citizens think about. He held it very close to the chest, and that's very often an indicator of an authoritarian. It works the same way in business as it does in authoritarian dictators politically. So 82% of decisions made by authoritarian leaders are unilateral. Okay, number two, authoritarian regimes are 2.5 times more likely to engage in violent conflict than democratic regimes. That's a 2006 study. Now, that's really interesting. Now, and if you go and look at where the most fighting tends to happen, it tends to be like authoritarian leaders drum that up. And now some of it is legitimate with democracies, especially if you're in a fight of self-defense, but authoritarian regimes tend to be far worse at this. Number three, authoritarian regimes are more likely to prioritize the interests of the elite over those of the general population in their decision-making process. And you see this with the oligarchs and prioritizing their interests over the interest of the average citizen in Russia who just kind of got the raw end of it. And by the way, in fairness, that did happen in Ukraine early on as well. But Ukraine is actively working on decorruptizing, if I can coin that term, where Russia is not. There was a 2016 study that said 95% of cases, authoritarian leaders consult with less than 10 advisors. What did I just say yesterday about Putin talking to just a handful of advisors before going in and keeping it very quiet, right? That's the way authoritarians tend to roll. Number 5, authoritarian regimes are less likely to take risks or pursue innovative solutions to problems, with only 11% of authoritarian regimes classified as innovative. So they keep doing the old ways rather than pursuing new innovative options. And so they get left behind over time because you can't keep up. Number 6, authoritarian leaders consult with other leaders or stakeholders in only 10% of the cases. That's very similar to something else we just talked about. This is from the Journal of Conflict Resolution. Only 13% of authoritarian regimes have free and independent media. Now that's something. The free and independent media is a protector. It keeps you from running off the rails. The other day I talked about Democrats need Republicans, Republicans need Democrats. They're looking to see what the other's doing wrong, but it keeps you safe, right? A free media also keeps you safe in that same way. Okay, next, authoritarian regimes are more likely to engage in censorship and propaganda in order to control public opinion and limit opportunities for dissent. Now, we see that work out. That's a 2001 study. A 2015 study also found that the degree of media control is 43% higher in authoritarian regimes than in democratic regimes. Right? So there's something significant about that. And again, it's like taking that safety off the rails off, and you're on a winding cliff where you can fall off. Let's take the guardrails down. That's what's happened. And so when they go wrong, they go very wrong. Number 9, authoritarian regimes are more likely to make use of arbitrary detention and other repressive measures to support dissent and maintain control. So people have gone to jail for holding up a blank piece of paper in Russia during a protest. Now, that's not the first place. Somebody pointed this out. That's not the first place that it's happened, but what? I mean, or calling the war, which is actually a war. You can't have 200,000 casualties in a special military operation. It's a war. But calling it a war is going to get you in trouble as well, and you'll go to jail or pay a huge fine. Similarly, in that same vein, there's a 2014 Journal of Democracy study that reported that authoritarian regimes are 12 times more likely to use arbitrary detention and maintain political control than democracies. 12 times. So one more and we'll be done. Number 10, authoritarian regimes are likely to make decisions based on short-term political calculations or considerations rather than long-term strategic planning, according to the Carnegie Endowment for Peace. So let's sum this up. Authoritarian regimes are likely to do worse, be shorter time horizon, do things for selfish reasons, private, like small group of counselors rather than how it affects other people. Now, if you are Russia and this is the way that you roll, and you are in fact an authoritarian regime with a veneer of democracy, and you see your neighbor as a comparison radically westernizing and trying to join the Western world, you've got to do something about it. And I think that also, I don't think that's all of Putin's calculation, but I think that also lent itself to Putin's calculation. And if you look at the difference between North and South Korea. North Koreans are not allowed to communicate with the outside world, particularly South Koreans. What would you think if you were North Korean and you saw just how much better the South Koreans are doing? Look at a map of North and South Korea at night, and you'll be convinced just by looking at that map that there is a significant difference. So I think the nature of the authoritarian regime finds the nature of a thriving democracy on its doorstep to be a threat. And that's at least part of the reason that Putin invaded Ukraine. Tell me what you think. I'd be happy to hear it. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this, please give me a like, a thumbs up. You can buy me a coffee, but thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.